Okay. Wow. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this. I'm going to just like share my screen and okay, hopefully all of you can see this. If you have any trouble, I'm monitoring the Discord, so feel free to jump in and say to let me know if there's any trouble. Um, just so this is it. This is my first presentation, so be gentle with me. I'm gonna try to go fairly speedily through all of this stuff because I have a lot to cover. So many slides. So this is it. My mom is gonna see this, isn't she? How to write a filthy game to be proud of with me, Bendi Barrett. So first of all, this is the mom in question. My mom doesn't look like that, but close enough. Uh, Sorry, hold on. Just gotta move everything around on my screen. Okay, perfect. So first of all, the content warning. This presentation is going to have some coarse language, frank discussions to and references, frank discussions of and references to sex and sexual practices, conversation around consent, and I'm going to use the term sexual assault just one time, and will be like, and I'll never mention it again. I just wanted to let anybody know so that no one felt like sideswiped by that. There's non-explicit but sexualized images, and as a Black queer man, it's coming from a primarily queer angle. Finally, I don't think this is probably cool. There's nothing too spicy here, but also we just want to cover our bases. There's a lot of swearing, and I don't want to be responsible for anybody's kids and their poor upbringing. So if you are uncomfortable at any point, feel free to just bail. We're talking a lot about consent today, so you have the power to just revoke consent and just peace out of this if you need to. All right, so let's get started. What the shit is this? All right, great question. Thanks. I'm so glad you asked. So I want to get you thinking about why you want to make interactive fiction. Why you might want to make interactive fiction. I want to raise a few concerns worth considering before you start, offer a little bit of a framework for making something really small to start with, help you avoid some pitfalls, and not make an ass of myself, which always a possibility. So who the shit am I? My name is Bendi Barrett. I graduated from Cornell in 2008, and I have used my degree to kill a mosquito. It was probably the highlight of my academic career. Um, Also, Benji Bright is my smut writing alias. I'll get to that in a second. I primarily write interactive fiction. Under my given name, I wrote Avatar of the Wolf for choiceofgames.com. And also, so that was in, who knows, 2015 maybe? Sure, that sounds good. And then I wrote Fate of the Storm Gods, which came out this past January. But you're here for the dirty stuff. Like, who's not here for the dirty stuff? So the dirty stuff. First of all, here's a thirsty selfie. Um, and I also wrote in 2013, I wrote my first game in the Twine language called Fuck That Guy. In 2014, I wrote a game called Gods. And then more recently, I have written a kind of a puzzle game. Also, this is all in Twine. I wrote a puzzle game called The Lotus Prince, which was done during a game jam. We'll talk more about game jams later. And finally, Doors in 2020, which is a kind of like a Harry Potter meets The Magicians, if you're familiar with that. It's just a very kind of horny, like witch boys on parade sort of thing that is sort of on not hiatus, but it's just kind of like a slower work process because it got expensive. Um, all right, so what the shit is interactive fiction? There are probably people who watching this who know a lot about interactive fiction and maybe some who don't know any. So I'm just gonna kind of try to use the most basic terms and kind of explain what I mean by interactive fiction. So in linear/traditional fiction, your story just goes one way. You start at the start and you end at the end. Even if the story has sort of plays with time or memory, like something like Memento, if you've seen it, the film. Um, you still are going to start at the start and end at the end, no matter what kind of shuffling you do of the events in the middle. Whereas interactive fiction branches. I made this, and I am sorry for it. It is hideous, I know, but it basically illustrates that the narrative is not going in a singular direction. It is branching off, and it can be so much more complicated than what you see here, but this is just kind of a brief visual indication. Yeah, so the next question that I kind of wanted to answer was why IF. So in traditional / linear fiction, you have maybe a story about a sexy thief. This is a sexy thief. I found him on Adobe Stock, and this I couldn't not put this in the presentation. So you have the sexy thief, not the horny thief. He's not horny yet. So you have the sexy thief, and he's going to be versus the sexy detective, also Adobe Stock. Thank you so much for these, the gold. And that's the storyline. You know, it's gonna be the sexy thief versus the sexy detective. They're gonna be doing whatever shenanigans, and it starts at the start and ends at the end. Whereas in interactive fiction, we have once again our sexy nipple out thief, and his storyline can maybe primarily deal in one branch with the sexy detective, and in another branch, maybe he doesn't even meet the detective at all. Maybe the primary antagonist or person or the foil is the sexy thief too. And yeah, I found this on Adobe Stock too. This gold mine. So interactive fiction, there's a ton of possibilities, but just the basic idea is that you're not going along a singular track. And that's one of the things that makes interactive fiction very exciting and very attractive to people who want to tell kind of multi-threaded stories. So now I've convinced you. So you want to make some smut. Yay. Thank you. Welcome to the club. The first question in my mind, especially when it comes to writing horny stuff, is do you need a pseudonym? Here are the pros of a pseudonym. Are you job hunting anytime soon? Maybe you don't want the first thing that shows up when you put your name to be the horny game that you wrote. You'll have probably fewer perverts in your DMs. Perverts notoriously get into DMs. It's like where they live, basically. You get to also decide exactly how much to share and with whom. The cons, fewer perverts in your DMs. Maybe the perverts were the thing that you wanted in your DMs. Like all out of all of this, like your goal was to just get people to send you incredibly and increasingly horny messages, and that might not happen if you kind of box yourself behind a pseudonym and don't make yourself available on social media. But if you do decide to make yourself available on social media, running dual identities is time consuming. Oh my God, I've done it for many a year now, and sometimes I'm just like, what an exhaustion. If you get successful, you might have to think about what that means in terms of scrutiny. If you, unfortunately, we live in a society, many of us anyway, where if you were a teacher and you're found to be making explicit material, that can have ramifications in your job. And you don't even need to be a teacher. I think there was recently a thing about an EMS worker who was fired because of an OnlyFans account, and your mom might find out. I don't know your mom. I hope she's cool, but she might not be, and so that's, I guess, something to think about. So yeah, a pseudonym is a protective tool, but it can also obscure you from your work or kind of put you a step removed from it. So weigh out those options before you start if you want less of a headache. And now the question is, why are you doing this? Is it for reasons of pleasure or reasons of clout? Because horny is as good a reason as any to create art. That's my personal opinion, and I stand by it. My first works I just made because I thought they would be hot, and I didn't see a lot of that kind of work out there. However, once you start trying to conform your work into kind of clout or award winning or kind of putting it in front of the right people who are your peers, that's hard to ignore. Like, I think all of us kind of have that drive, most of us creatives have that drive to be recognized by our peers. And I think, however, once you start doing that, it might take away from the sort of quote unquote pure elements of the work. So if you just really wanted to write something that's just super horny and out there, once you start making considerations about, well, is this marketable? Can I get attention from it? Those two things might kind of be at odds with each other. So just be honest with yourself and what you kind of expect to get out of the process of making erotic work. And I think you'll probably be doing yourself a favor in the long run. Modeling consent. Consent. Oh boy. Yeah, when we're talking about consent, we talk about sex, we talk about consent. So when we say consent, what do we mean? Sexual consent at its most basic is the ability of a participant in a sexual scenario to agree to that sexual content. So this is pulled from Planned Parenthood, and basically the idea is that sex is freely given. You aren't being coerced. Sex is revocable/reversible, which means you can say no at any time and just tap out of the scene. It's informed, which means that things like, you agree on condom usage, you know about your partner's STI statuses. You have all of the information that you need to make an informed decision. It's enthusiastic. So when you're kind of navigating these scenarios, if you sense hesitation, you pull back. And then it's specific. So just because you agreed to, for example, oral sex, that doesn't necessarily mean that you agreed to like other forms of penetrative sex. And so those are the kind of the tenets on which sexual consent in the real world are built. Consent in games is a little bit different, especially if we're talking about interactive fiction, if we're talking about games that don't necessarily have the benefit of like a tabletop, for example, where you have a DM, you have other players, and you're kind of playing off of each other and kind of consenting in real time. When you have a game that has been pre-written by an author, you have to kind of approach things, I think, a little bit differently. That said, human sexual interactions are messy, and I think messiness is a part of the appeal of sex in games, as in life. And so consent in fiction isn't a one-to-one comparison to real life. That said, what I'm trying to point out is that messy and complicated interactions, and I think very often sex in games is like messy and complicated because you have all of these other power dynamics to consider, but I don't think those are justification for abusive behavior in digital or real world settings. When you're creating work that specifically aims to titillate, it comes with the burden of responsibility to do so thoughtfully. Again, especially when you're writing and you are the only kind of point of contact with a player. So if you violate, or if you subvert, or if you play with any of those rules that govern consent in real life, I think you have to be very, very liberal with content warnings and letting people know up front what they can expect when they come to games. So what I'm not saying is that writing fictional work in which consent is unclear is inherently unethical. That's not the point of this talk at all. I think, and I trust you as adults to make the decisions about what kind of consent and what kind of work that you want to create. I'm also not obliquely condoning depictions of sexual assault. Again, that's not what this is for. It's just that there are scenarios in which there are scenarios in which if there are scenarios in which consent are unclear, I think what I'm trying to point out is that you should be clear, communicative, and unambiguous about those lines, and you should let people know up front so that they can decide for themselves what to engage in or not. I made this little triangle. I'm going to try to explain it very quickly. So basically, as you are the creator, and I'm talking specifically in interactive fiction and in linear fiction, when you create work, you're forming a kind of a bond of consent with the player, and you are also designing the NPCs and scenarios that they interact with. And so in all of these potential scenarios, you want to ensure that kind of violations of this bond that you're forming between the player and the creator aren't being violated. And so the player kind of trusts the creator to be upfront about what the game entails and what they can expect. Um, and so at no point is the creator kind of absent from this. You never get to really like abscond from your responsibility to the player and the worlds you create. And that's kind of what I'm trying to suggest here, is that you're always kind of in tension and in kind of conversation with all the parts of this formula. So here's a few examples. The first one is from the game that I wrote in 2020, Doors. Um, and the specific part that I want to address out of this kind of list of themes, which I have in the game, and it's upfront, and you can just check it out and see what kind of things you can encounter in the game in terms of sexual encounters. The one that I really want to talk about is like hypnosis / himbofication. If you don't know what himbos are, or himbofication, a himbo is basically just kind of like a dumb, hot dude who's just kind of like nice and just dense. In the game, you play a kind of a competent sorcerer, and you encounter another sorcerer who you can enter this consensual arrangement with, and they hypnotize you and kind of make you dumber. And um, and then there's a sexual encounter that can follow along certain lines. And technically, this is a violation of consent, because when you remove someone's intellect, you essentially remove their ability to consent. And so the game, I think, wants to have a conversation about what it means to do that and what it means to wield that power. And there are a lot of kind of power exchanges in the game, as in real life. And so the lines of is this a kind of an okay thing to even consent into, I think is an interesting question. And it's one that we don't necessarily need an answer for in the real world, because there's no one who can take your mind away from you and make you dumb and hot. Though sometimes I kind of wish I could just be dumb and hot. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about consent and kind of being clear with players about what they can expect in the work. And another example is from a 2016 game called Lady Killer in a Bind by Christine Love. This is a screen that comes up at the very beginning of the game, and it says all like power exchange must be negotiated. Fiction is a safe space. In real life, there's nothing more important than clearly communicating your desires and limits in advance without either party feeling uncomfortable or pressured. So I thought it was really smart and really impactful that this was like the very, very first thing you see, a kind of a callback to, again, those like pillars of consent in real life, and then telling you that within this game space, things might not operate exactly the same, but when we leave it again, please don't, automatically take those lessons with you. Um, and so again, just the idea of like foregrounding the importance of communication and consent. Um, I just like, if you're going to follow the road of making erotic work, I just really hope that you think about consent. Just take some time and just chew it over. I guarantee that it will make your work have more depth, and um, it'll be fun, because consent is fun, and it's a fun thing to think about and play with. Um, that said, let's move on to making the damn thing. What incredible. So here are the tools that I primarily use. I use Twine, which is an open source tool, and then I use ChoiceScript. And I'll talk a little bit more about ChoiceScript. I'll talk a little bit more about Choice of Games, which is the company behind ChoiceScript, a little bit later when I talk about publishers. Um, but these are primarily the tools I use. I highly recommend Twine if you just want to jump in and just make something. It's really super easy, and it's well documented. There's a lot of games made in it, and we'll talk a little bit about uh, the kind of games marketplace a little bit later. But there's more stuff than just that. Like, oh my God, like there's so much. Off of the top of my head, I could list Inform 7, Unity, TADS, Inc, Quest, and RenP. some of those are not open source, and Inform 7 is in the process, seems to still be in the process of open sourcing. So yeah, I mean, you could probably jump in and make a piece of interactive fiction with any of these things tomorrow. Some of them are more difficult than others, but there are tools out there for you. Um, this isn't exactly a tutorial, so I won't get too deep into the tools, but I do kind of want to really quickly talk about like a design flow and like what that might look like for your emerging game. So for me, the first part starts with the brainstorming and research. This part can last hours or years. It just depends on how deep into this nonsense of my own brain I am. So once you kind of have an idea, for me, the next part is scoping. And there's like exclamation points because scoping never stops. Like when we talk about scope, we're just talking about like how far do you go in the game design elements. Like what can you reasonably accomplish? What can you accomplish and keep yourself sane? Every part of this should be about keeping yourself sane. I can't stress that enough. So once you've got a scope, you've got an idea, you write a lot and you design a lot and you just do that until you have something that resembles a game, and then you cut the fat because you're going to have a lot of fat. You're going to have things when you go back and back to the idea of scope, you're going to have so many things that just don't need to be there, or you don't have time to fully flesh out. And yeah, just don't be afraid to be vicious. Like your inner editor, just let them out and let them kind of cut away a lot of the fat, because especially in kind of early the early process of becoming a game designer, you're going to find that you are ambitious, and ambition is wonderful, and it can also kill your project. Finish? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe you finish the first thing, or maybe you don't. And maybe you finish the second thing, or maybe you don't. You have to, I mean, you don't have to do anything, but I recommend that you think of the game design process as a kind of cultivation of a particular set of skills rather than the output of one game or another game. Often, out of the bones of one thing that died horribly, you can kind of develop and flourish with another thing. And a little bit more about that idea of like taking the dead things and kind of growing them elsewhere. That will be a little bit later. And then, so this is not fucking it up. Yeah, I really just wanted to use this stock image that I found again. Like, I don't think we talked about it, but it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Like, I don't know exactly what you would ever use it for besides this. So maybe it was just made for me. Okay, so sex writing tips. Yuck. Let's talk about it. So follow your inner cringe meter. I have a piece like that I wrote, and it's very bad. And I'm going to put my sexy voice on, and I'm going to read it to you. Okay? Like, I hope that you're consenting into this with me. Um, it's spicy, but again, it's bad. So you could just pause the video or just put, I don't know, make a cup of tea if you don't want to do this part. Don thrust his manhood into his gasping partner. I, I, I've never felt like this, Robbie gasped. Don grinned. Well, just wait, because this is about to get a whole lot deeper. Did that turn you on? Please say no. I hope it. I really hope it didn't. I mean, maybe you're like, oh, he has a kind of a sexy voice. Which thank you. But we've got a list of sins here. So the repetition is clumsy. There's stuttering dialogue, which I'm not really usually a fan of. Overuse of innuendo, terrible use of genitalia synonyms. I mean, dick and cock, they're just fine. Like you could just use those words. Those are free. Don't use manhood. You never need manhood. No one needs manhood. No one needs manhood. Whoa. Anyway, there's no sensory details here, and the writing is just flat. So more sex writing tips. Why are you doing this to us? Focus on sexury. Focus on sexury details. We don't have sex with just our genitals and our eyes. If you think about a particularly memorable sexual experience, I would bet that there are aspects of touch, smell, taste, sounds, summer. Did you kind of like experience this other person's sweat? The smell of them. Was it cold? Did you snuggle up to them for warmth and then things started to happen? Think about those details and bring them into your work if you want to kind of make something that feels real and alive. Pleasing everyone pleases no one. You cannot make everyone happy or horny. Like, it's just not going to happen. You occupy a corner of the erotic spectrum, and I think it behooves you to speak to that authentically. Only you know what that corner is. And I think when you're making erotic work, paying attention to that is huge. So the last sex writing tip is authenticity and emotional range. I think a lot of people just kind of coming to writing about sex and kind of writing erotic scenes forget that like sex is so many more things than just arousal. It's hesitation and nervousness and curiosity, and there are elements of disgust and shame and irritation and humor, and all of that has a place in erotic writing. And I think you should try to be bringing in as much of the human experience as you possibly can, and especially humor. Like, sex is ridiculous, and it should be hot and funny, and you should laugh through it if you can stomach it. Okay. So now we have some development tips. Yuck. Avoid infinite branches. One of the things that can happen when you first start out making interactive fiction is, again, the problem of ambition. There is there are a couple of terms for it, but I wanted to keep it very simple for this. So I just went with infinite branches. Like, you don't want the forest of your game to become a. I don't have a metaphor for this. Just start small, keep it simple, hide your work. A hard game to code is not more fun than an easy one. I have learned this lesson a million times, and I will probably have to learn it a million more. Don't let your cleverness get in the way of like making something that you can actually finish. And try a game jam. I am becoming a huge proponent of the game jam. If you're not familiar with the idea, it's just you are making a game within a certain time frame. The time frames vary depending on the game jam, but sometimes it's a weekend, sometimes it's a week, 4 days. Who knows? It's bananas. It's anarchy. But working within a tight time span makes you have to make decisions about scope that are hard. And again, scope, I think, is the heart and soul of game development. And so when you're forced to make these decisions, you kind of have to put on your product manager hat and just decide what, sometimes on a whim, like what's possible and what's not. And I think it's incredible practice. Itch.io holds jams on an ongoing basis, and Ludum Dare is a twice yearly game jam competition. So if you have a competitive streak or you just kind of want to get your game in front of a bunch of people, it's a great way to just kind of play with that and just meet other developers and just get your stuff in front of people who care about this stuff. Some more development tips. You're like, I am so sick of your tips. Don't sweat the details. I am very, very, very often susceptible to this. You just think like, do you want like the perfect animation of a circle? Is that worth losing sleep over? If you have a super clever idea, does that translate to a memorable experience that your player is going to have like after a month away from the game? They might experience it and be like, oh yeah, that was pretty sleek. But I would argue that working on the meat of the game, working on the narrative, working on how you communicate ideas is more valuable to the output than just, doing some clever bit of design frippery that, no one is going to care about in a week. Steal from yourself shamelessly. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. I tend to think of my code as a pantry, and whether I wrote it for games 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I'm trying to keep the pantry stocked. And so I always kind of give myself license to take what I need. So if I wrote like a really great conversation system in one game, why not port that conversation system kind of into another game if it works. Don't spend time kind of going back and doing everything over just because you feel like, this is what game design is. Yeah, steal from yourself. And just be fucking nice to yourself. Like, making anything is tough, but making smut is really tough. I think writing sex and sexuality with a certain level of seriousness is a vulnerable act. It's really funny and easy to make parody, like that scene that I wrote earlier, like a bozo. If I were trying to write a really emotionally affecting scene and trying to deliver it in that same time span, I would have probably had to take 10 times the length of time to sit there and then make that happen. So it really is a vulnerable act, and it's meaningful to do that work. I think we think about sex as this completely transitory kind of cheap and tawdry thing sometimes, or at least something that we don't want to kind of drag out into the middle of the street and expose ourselves. Ooh, that's getting weird. You know what I mean. Sex is a vulnerable act, and writing sex is also a vulnerable act. So allow yourself to have mixed emotions about your goals and just try to have fun with it if you can. And if you make something that you enjoy, but you don't think it's ready for the world to see because you're not ready to be exposed in that way, or you just feel like, this is like a weird thing that like you're not comfortable releasing, that's cool. You can absolutely make stuff to just make it. And I think exploring yourself and your sexuality through kind of different medium is like a phenomenal thing to do. But that said, if you do want to putting it out. First, terms and conditions. This is probably the sexiest part, right? Like, we're gonna agree, like, this is the sexiest part of the presentation. Terms and conditions. So read the TOC. Seriously, read it. Does the platform you intend to publish on allow explicit content? And if so, what are the limits? Here's an example. Steam allows erotic games now, but not images of real people. And if you're not familiar with Steam, it's one of the biggest game platforms in the world. And so going in, you want to make sure that you have a sense of what is allowed on the platform of your choice. And then read the TOC again for real. Publishing erotic work is a minefield. Every time a TOC is updated, it's worth your time to just check in again and see that your work is still compliant with that, with the terms and conditions of that platform, publisher, whatever, because things shift. Payment processors crack down. There always seems to be some sort of crackdown happening. And so pay attention, I would say, to the TOC and what's allowed and what rules you might be in violation of without even necessarily thinking about it. Self-publish or find a publisher. So this section could probably be its own presentation. So I'm going to kind of run sort of quickly through these. And again, just keep in mind that like this could be its own whole thing. So in terms of platforms, Patreon is one of the sort of behemoths of crowdfunding. The Top Adult Games account on Patreon makes that much, $76,663 a month, which is a lot of money, and you probably won't make that much money. Sorry. Patreon also isn't a discovery engine, and all that means is that Patreon doesn't really isn't really designed to help you be found by potential subscribers. So you kind of have to go find them yourself and bring them to you. If you I Yeah, I have a Patreon, and if you have any questions about that, like, just feel free to ask me in Discord, and I'll try to answer those. So Steam, as of this writing, this was a couple days ago, Steam had over 24 million concurrent players, um, which is a lot of players. And because Steam now offers erotic games, yeah, at least one of them will probably play your dirty game. Like, there is an audience somewhere in those 24 million people for, whatever, pervy shit that you have in mind. Um, that's awesome. That's kind of a beautiful sentiment. Platforms continued. Itch.io, which I mentioned regarding the game jams, also is a kind of a hub for erotic games. It features over 2,000 of them. Some of them are mine. And you can, it kind of has a broad swath of games. So there's tabletop stuff, there's interactive fiction, there's visual novels, which is probably a subset of interactive fiction, but we won't go into that. And it's just, it's probably the first stop, I think, if you're kind of looking to kind of dip your toes into the idea of erotic games. It's a great place to find some and just kind of mess around with them. Um, and so yeah, marketing, marketing. Um, so you remember that thing about TOCs? Yeah, we're gonna revisit that. Marketing erotic work on social media is probably even harder than making it, because of, again, the same reasons. You have crackdowns, you have shifting sand in terms of what is allowed and kind of the interpretations of what is allowed. Um, so I would say understand what's allowable and what's not on social media and try to skew conservative. That's the last time I'll probably tell anybody to skew conservative. Because losing a following because of a ban or some other messed up thing, it really sucks. And I have seen it happen to other erotic creators, and it can be devastating to your livelihood. So just keep an eye on it and really kind of think about what kinds of stuff are allowed. Um, and if you are into this to make money, it's worth your time, I think, to get to know other erotic creators and kind of learn from their successes and learn from their mistakes. They, I'm sure, will be legion, and they have a lot of lessons to impart on one another. On one another. They have a lot of lessons to impart on you. And yeah, so my thoughts kind of wandered a little bit. So yeah, get to know other erotic creators, learn from their successes and their mistakes. Again, the people who have been banned, they probably have a lot to tell you about what to do and what not to do on social media when promoting erotic work. Going pro. So when I say pro, I kind of, it's kind of tongue in cheek, and all I really mean by that is the idea of a of publishing work through a publisher rather than just doing it yourself. There are a lot of benefits, like having a marketing department behind you, or like royalties are nice. So here's just a couple of the publishers who are doing kind of romance and offer content that is erotic in nature. So there's Santa stories. They offer 25% of the subscription revenue based on how much of your stories are read by their subscribers, which is their model for paying out royalties. And then also there's Choice of Games slash Heart's Choice. If you have seen me on any other panels today, I have been with Rebecca Slitt, who is the creative lead behind Heart's Choice. They are a romance imprint, and some of their games feature erotic content, and some of them are just kind of sweet romances. Choice of Games offers a royalty-based contract as well, and the link is in there. Just a quick thing. I included in the Discord a set of my slides, and it has all of the links here that are listed here at the website. So if you want, you can check those out. So jump in. I highly recommend you just jump in, don't drown. And what I mean by that is I'm going to give you a checklist of things that you can check in with yourself about the process of like creating a piece of erotic interactive fiction or just erotic anything really. Am I comfortable with how I've dealt with consent in my work? I think that should be one of the primary conversations that you're having with yourself about your work, especially to start. Again, consent is just this huge monolith of a thing in the way that we conceptualize it, but it doesn't have to be this hugely stressful thing, especially if you have a sense of what consent means in the real world. You can just, if there's anything that kind of pulls against that, gives attention, revises it, disregards it, those are things that you should be letting people know up front. And so have I considered whether players would be comfortable playing my game? It's hard to say whether any individual player is going to be comfortable playing any individual game. And again, not everything is for everyone, but I think that as authors and writers of sexualized work, we need to have a sense that we're kind of creating a world in which people know the stakes as they're entering, and that's what I mean by comfort. Like, do people feel like they get what you're going for, and that you're not gonna like pull the rug out from under them as they are entering your game world? Have you written something that you find personally hot? Like, again, because horny is as good a reason as anything else for making erotic work. Um, I would I would say anybody watching this, just make something because you think it's sexy. Just give it a go and see what you come up with. Um, and if you do, please let me know because I think that's been phenomenal. Like I don't mind the horny people in my DMs. It's fine. Um, so, what are your goals? Do you want to get royalties? Do you want to release something for free? Do you just think there should just be more erotic work in the world, and you're just like, I'm the one to do it. If I just think that you should have a sense of what your long-term interests are. Not everybody wants to have a sideline in writing porny games, which I don't get it personally, but do you? Um, And is the process you use to create this work sustainable? I think this is a real question, and it's something that I have dealt with a lot. Like when you are, so I don't know. This is a little bit of a real talk time. I think when you are creating erotic work, uh, there might come a time when you just find that it's not serving the purpose or the goal that you set in the previous in the previous line. So if you're like, I want to make money, you're writing this shit and you're not making money, or you want people to send you messages on Twitter and tell you that they think it's super hot, and you're just not getting that. I think that you should make sure that you are not putting so much of your ego and so much of yourself into the work that not getting those paychecks or those messages feels like a repudiation of yourself and your sexuality. Like when you bind too much of your identity up in the work, it can have a kind of a deleterious effect on your sanity. So just try to keep the work sustainable and try to keep a kind of a healthy outlook on the creation process, if at all if at all possible. And lastly, I'm gonna let my mom see this. I am pretty sure my mom is going to watch this at some point, and honestly, I don't think she's gonna be surprised by any of this. Because I'm gonna call her out, and she once called me a slut, but it's in the past. So winding down, there is an appetite for erotic stories in games. They might be hard to market, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth making. Um, and the counterbalance to that is that game making eats time. It's time consuming, and it will probably just take all of the time that you're willing to put into it. So understand your goals before you get into it so that you can kind of keep a healthy perspective on what you're getting out of it. And so here's a couple of recommendations. There's not too many of them, just kind of little things that I have been enjoying recently, pretty much. So Monster Prom and Monster Camp are games developed by Beautiful Glitch and published by those awesome guys. I think that these games are very breezy, and they talk about sex in a way that is candid without necessarily belaboring the point. They're not erotic games as such, but the kind of sex exists as a kind of a background reality or a background texture for some of the characters. In a way that I find really interesting and really compelling. And it just goes to show that not every game that deals with the subject of sex needs to be some deep psychological like exercise. And then there's Lady Killer in a Bind, which is sort of the opposite of that in some ways. It was made by Christine Love and Love Conquers All Games, and it has a convoluted setup, but essentially it's a lot about power exchanges and relationships, social manipulation, and just all of these kind of sticky, messy, human, sexualized interactions that are very much of a piece with the kind of the primary goal that I started this out with, saying that sex in games is kind of like often a mirror of the messiness of human sexuality. And I think this is a great illustration. And I've had a lot of fun playing it. Shout out to this panel, by the way, which just gave me reasons to like play all of these erotic games. Like just putting that in my schedule as research time. Oh my God, just you can't beat that. And then Ben recommends X2. So Robert Yang is a creator who is a gay male, and he makes these kind of beautiful, thoughtful, somewhat janky games that are really brilliant and thoughtful. And just read his design blog, which is blog.radiator.debacle.us. And it shows that sex games can be really smart, and they can be really kind of deal with like theory and bring in all of these really heady topics. And my games are not that. And so I just have a lot of respect for Robert Yang, and I just think that you should absolutely check out his games. I don't know if they would technically fall under the category of erotic fiction, but this is my presentation, and I can recommend what I want. Hmm. Me want more Rex. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, taste is subjective, and sexual taste is a shit show. If you go play some erotic games, again, itch.io is a great place to find them. Just search the erotic tag. Get a feel for what you personally respond to and what you don't. I think that's the best way to learn about what kind of game you might want to make. And really, that's what this is about. What kind of game you want to make, not what kind of game I think is great. So for links and references, if you want a full link of everything, a list of links to pretty much everything I mentioned in this presentation, you can go to benmakesstuff.com/2021-presentation. I also put that link in the Discord. I put that link in the Discord as well. And yeah, thanks for coming. This is like a picture of me after I finished the first draft of this presentation, and I was I was in a state, friends. Okay, so that's the whole thing. So thanks. Let me stop doing that, and I'm going to check to see if there's any questions in the Discord. Yeah, so there's I'm seeing one question so far. Do you have a guideline about how many branches is enough, like in a time frame? I don't know if time is how you measure things with interactive fiction. So yeah, that's by Coral. That's a great question. I think that there isn't necessarily a specific guideline for how many branches you should use. I think especially because depending on the game, a branch can be really super short, or a branch can just, be just kind of spin you off into the stratosphere. So I think it is incredibly subjective. I think you should probably judge things more based on how much time it takes to create it. And I think average playthrough is probably a stronger metric for deciding what you kind of want to do in interactive fiction. So if you have one branch that takes 10 minutes to play through, and then another that takes 30, maybe you kind of want to go and recalibrate those branches to just kind of make kind of each of those kind of pay off in terms of time commitment and in terms of emotional resonance, which is a big thing. I think for me personally, I think I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that all branches of the work feel equally. I want to make sure that all branches of the work feel kind of equally padded out, and so that it doesn't feel like there's one kind of bad end that just like you chose that and you're just screwed. I hope that remotely answers your question. Let me see if there's any other questions that I missed earlier. Okay, I don't see. Oh, any advice for getting not hurt when people don't praise the amazing porn you worked so hard on? Oh, just know that I support you. I support you entirely. I have, oh boy, writing porn and trying to be a kind of a discerning creator of that kind of work is just a fascinating and humbling process, I think. So you might pour yourself into one piece, and just kind of it just gets roundly ignored, and another piece that you banged out Another piece that you gotta banged out on a Saturday night, and you're just like, like I've had a couple spritzers. It's time to write some porn. And then people are like, "This is so great. This is the hottest thing I've ever written. I've ever seen." You can't control what people are going to respond to, and also I will say that I think there are often moments where I put I put work out on in kind of like different forums or different places, and sometimes people just respond to it differently for some reason. Like something that might do really well on Patreon might not necessarily do well on like nifty.org, if you're familiar with that, or vice versa. Like just getting your work in front of different eyes is probably a better solution for that than kind of worrying about people not liking a specific thing. It's like it might not have found its audience yet. Um, uh, yeah. So, if you want to address it, how would you describe the difference between interactive fiction and visual novels? I think that's uh, a really good question. I don't actually necessarily think there is one. I think that visual novels are often um, often have the same kind of like branching path setups, and the kind of mechanisms might be a little bit different. The tropes might be a little bit different, that we're kind of more familiar with in visual novels than interactive fiction, like interactive fiction. But really, I think they're of a piece. And I would go so far as to say kind of like visual novels are a subset of interactive fiction, um, because when we talk about interactive fiction, that can mean anything from a Twine game to, if you've ever seen the Black Mirror episode on Netflix, Bandersnatch, that's also interactive fiction because you have you have the simple basic ingredients of a narrative that plays out different ways, and that's really all you need for interactive fiction. Um, Okay, so I think that I have answered all the questions. So, thank you so much for coming to this, you guys. This was a lot of fun, and this was my first presentation that I just did by myself. And thank you for being so nice to me in the Discord. I hope you have had a wonderful con so far, and enjoy the rest of your whatever time it is, wherever you are. I have no idea. That's wonderful. Bye.